네, 안녕하세요. 오늘 마지막 세션 시작하겠습니다. 호프는 한 8시쯤 접속을 할 거고, 우리가 1시간 동안 영상을 본 다음에 질의응답 라이브로 진행하겠습니다. 그러면 영상 공유할게요.
Hi everyone, a massive thank you for joining today. So my name is Virgo and I am an author and mental health campaigner. So I spent my life travelling all over the world, doing a lot of work with schools, corporates and hospitals. And then I also run the all-party parliamentary group for eating disorders here in the UK with the government. So my focus is predominantly on eating disorders and exercise addiction, but also how it kind of links in with that broader spectrum of mental health as well. So in this session today, you're going to get a bit of an overview of eating disorders. We're then going to hear a little bit of my own lived experience, and then I'm going to talk really practically about how you can think about supporting your students within your school environment as well. There will be the chance to email me after the session, so I'll put my email details onto the final slide. So please do feel free to kind of utilize me if you've got any questions after the session today, or if there are things that come up maybe further down the line once you've had a conversation with someone or you've got concerns about someone as well. It's also worth remembering that this is quite a sensitive topic, and I'm sure there'll be some of you who are watching this who maybe it resonates with, who maybe have your own personal experiences, maybe yourselves directly or supporting other people. If that's the case, again, that's totally normal to feel certain emotions around that, but would encourage you to think about what your support network looks like. Who have you got around you that you can seek that additional support from? So just to kind of get us thinking a little bit about eating disorders, and to get us thinking, I guess, in that kind of much more broader societal context as well, is I wanted to put this whole idea to you that we currently live in a society where eating disorders have been completely normalized. We have this society where there is this obsession with food and exercise and bodies. We judge every single person on what they look like. We judge people on what food choices they make. We judged people's pandemic based on whether they gained weight or lost weight. And we live in that society, don't we, where so many people, they go through this period of celebrating Christmas, as an example, where you indulge yourself 5-6 days, whatever it might be. And then the whole of society, come January, is encouraged to go into that period of restriction. We might think that this is totally normal, but I think sometimes that's the danger with all of these things, is that we normalize it so much that we then don't really realize that a lot of these behaviors around food, around exercise, around our bodies are actually quite dysfunctional. You take something else, for example, such as calorie counting. So we now have, across the UK, calorie labeling all over menus, pretty much in every restaurant now. And again, some people find this, they think it's helpful, they think it's useful, people like going, they have something to talk about perhaps when they do it. But actually the shame attached to what people now pick is huge. We also know with calorie counting that actually 25% of people who start counting their calories will go on to develop an eating disorder, and 35% of people will spend the rest of their lives with a dysfunctional relationship with food, with exercise, or with their bodies. It's really, really important that we are mindful of how we are talking about food, how we're kind of labeling things, whether we're labeling things as good and bad. We just shouldn't be doing it. Food needs to be this kind of neutral space for us. We also need to be mindful of not commenting on other people's plates as well. Again, I know that so many of us go through life saying things like, oh, I can eat that because I earned it. Or I'm going to go to the gym tonight, so I'm going to have that slice of cake. Maybe even in the staff room at your school. Maybe that's kind of like a hot topic of conversation, that kind of justification of what we're having. But again, you never really know what's going on for someone. And we know with eating disorders particularly, they can be completely hidden in plain sight. And that's why we need to start talking about food, exercise, bodies in a much more neutral, safe way. So over the last couple of years, we have seen a huge rise in the number of people who are currently struggling with eating disorders here in the UK. This is something that is represented on a global scale as well, but particularly here in the UK, we have seen that rise. We now know that 16% of people at some point, age 16 plus, will present positively with an eating disorder. During the pandemic, we saw a fourfold increase of hospital admissions for young people under the age of 16. And over the last 4 years, we've seen an 186% increase in males developing eating disorders. And the thing with eating disorders is they're still massively misunderstood. There's still so much stigma attached to them. People often think of them as a vanity exercise gone wrong, as a choice, as someone choosing to be difficult, as someone maybe being a picky eater or just fussy about what they're having. But actually, eating disorders are very serious mental health issues, and they have the highest mortality rate out of any other psychiatric illness. It's really, really important that we think about these stereotypes and we work out how we can offer that holistic support to people within our schools, within our communities, within our families, to make sure that they're reaching out for that support. Again, when we think of eating disorders, we so often think of them as something that only affects white teenage underweight girls. But actually, eating disorders present themselves in all different body types, people of all different genders, backgrounds, races, ethnicities, and people of all different ages as well. And actually, during the pandemic, the other huge increase we saw was actually middle-aged men developing eating disorders as well. Again, that kind of cohort of people that maybe we'd previously forgotten or maybe we didn't think would ever be affected by eating disorders. Eating disorders really do present themselves in so many different ways. I'm sure that you will have heard of the 3 main types. So anorexia, which is focused on restriction. You've got people with binge eating disorders, so people who eat a lot of food all in one go. People with bulimia, who tend to purge through vomiting or through exercise once they've eaten. We're seeing more and more people developing a type of eating disorder called ARFID, which is avoidant food restrictive intake disorder. And we've also got more people developing an eating disorder called orthorexia, which is this obsession with healthy eating to the extent that individuals will cut down their food intake so they're only eating maybe a handful of foods that they would categorize as healthy. One of the really scary things with something like orthorexia is that so much of the time, again, society praises that level of health as apparent health, I guess we should say. And they praise it in such a way that when people go to their doctor and talk about what's going on, so much of the time a doctor will say, oh no, well done, you're losing weight, well done for eating just that, well done for being so healthy. And that kind of enforces the eating disorder behavior even further. And the other kind of subtype is an eating disorder called atypical anorexia. I'm sure, again, some of you will have heard of it. I personally think it's an extremely fat-phobic diagnosis, but it's people who have anorexia. They have the brain thinking of someone with anorexia, but yet they fall into a higher weight body. And for them, there is, again, so much additional shame and guilt attached to their eating disorder because of their weight. So something that comes up, again, quite a lot of the time when I'm kind of working with schools, with individuals, but also from my own personal experience, is that whole kind of thing like, why did I develop an eating disorder? Why do some people develop eating disorders from families and some people don't? Again, eating disorders are so unique to individuals, but there are a couple of contributing factors that actually we have seen kind of across society. I think the first thing we cannot ignore is diet culture. Yes, we cannot say diet culture causes eating disorders, but it normalizes that culture around eating disorders. It normalizes, like we talked about at the start, that obsession with food and exercise and with our bodies. It normalizes a lot of dysfunctional relationships with food and pushes quite an unhelpful message. We also know, linking into diet culture, that kind of idea of health and what healthy is. Again, so many people, and I see this a lot in schools actually, particularly with young people, but also with adults too, is you've got young people telling you that actually healthy is a particular body type. And you're like, no, it's not. It's so much more than that. Healthy is having the energy to do things. It's having your hair function, like your hair looking okay. It's about having your body functioning. It's all of that sort of stuff, that whole package of stuff. But so much of the time, the way society has presented it, it tells us that healthy is a particular body size. And then again, linking to that is that kind of pressure from modern society, that pressure that in order to be happy and successful, you have to look a certain way. And again, so much of the time, I think we kind of blame certain aspects of modern society, social media, diet culture, for the rise of eating disorders. But what we really do know is that it does normalize all of this dysfunctional behavior, and that's what we need to be aware of. Other contributing factors, I think we kind of think about the pandemic and the pandemic's role in this. Again, there was huge amounts of uncertainty, there was so much isolation, and there was this huge amount of fear that kind of swept across the entire world. Some people went out and brought loads of toilet paper as a way to deal with what was going on in society at that time. For other people, they started to micromanage their food, micromanage what they're eating, micromanaging their exercise on a day-to-day basis. For so many of those individuals, they became fixated on those behaviors in order to numb the things they didn't want to feel, to numb all of that emotion. It became a way to give them a sense of certainty over a time in life where just everything felt so uncertain and so unsure about what the future looks like. We also know, and I touched on it a moment ago, that kind of role of social media within all of this. And I think social media, again, can so often get this really bad kind of press. We often blame it for pretty much everything that goes wrong in society. But actually, again, it's much more complicated than that. But what we do know on social media, and what we see all the time, is these wellness influencers. People with a certain number of followers sharing their diet advice, sharing their fitness advice. People who are telling us that if we want to look this particular way, we have to eat X, Y, Z on a day-to-day basis, do this amount of exercise every single week. So many people that I come into contact with, particularly young people, they tell me that they're only eating maybe, I don't know, protein, or they're only eating eggs, or they're only eating this type of food. And you're like, well, why are you doing that? And they sit down and they say, oh, well, this influencer's doing it. And you kind of have that conversation. You're kind of thinking, do you know what? Actually, that influencer has no nutritional background. They're not a dietitian. They're not a nutritionist. They don't have the source of that information. So how can it be a verified piece of information? Whenever I come into schools, I always say to children, please stop getting your diet advice and your fitness advice off social media, because we never actually know where that information has come from. And then what we do know with eating disorders, and what we're seeing, we've seen this over the last 18, 19 months or so, is a huge amount of research coming out which shows that eating disorders are caused by a genetic predisposition. What then happens is we have one of these contributing factors, and that person will go into an energy deficit, whether that's through restriction or through malnourishment. They'll go into that energy deficit, and it is that keeps them in the grips of the eating disorders. Eating disorders are not about bad body image. They're not about control. They're not caused by childhood trauma, but they are this genetic predisposition with all of these, or any of these, contributing factors. When we're talking about eating disorders today, we have to remember that they are a biologically brain-based mental health issue. But with the right treatment, with the right support, people can and people do recover. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take a moment to just share a little bit of my own personal experience with you. Once I've done this, like I said, I'll go on to talk really practically about the kinds of things that you can do to support those people around you within your school environment, but also I think thinking like a little bit outside of that as well, like what else does that support mechanism look like? So my story began on the 8th of May in 1990. I grew up in Bristol. I was one of 5 children. I didn't have a particularly challenging upbringing. Everyone kind of got along and functioned and seemed fairly together most of the time. When I was 9, I had my first lot of therapy. For some reason, I found it really difficult to express any sort of emotion. Whether it was happiness, whether it was sadness, there was just something in my brain that didn't quite click. And my mum thought the only solution to all of this was to send me for 1 hour of therapy every single Thursday lunchtime. So I'd leave school and go and see this therapist. We'd do little bits of artwork. She'd get me to write bad habits on a piece of paper and put them into a tissue box. And every single week I would sit there and think, what should and shouldn't I be saying? What's the right and wrong answer? What would all my friends be doing in this situation? After 6 months of that, nothing had changed for me in the slightest. I didn't really fully understand why I had to have therapy. I thought the whole thing was a little bit of a waste of time. And I couldn't get my head around the fact that people had to talk about their feelings and their emotions. So when it finished, I continued through the rest of junior school, living my life the way that I knew how. I was pretty happy most of the time, So I kind of got myself stuck in, got my head down, and just kind of kept doing what I was doing, hoping that at some point, something would just shift. When I got to secondary school, things felt slightly harder. My family life became slightly more volatile. My older brother constantly was running away from home, constantly ending up fighting with my dad, would often end up in A&E. And being that middle child, I made it my responsibility to try and fix this entire family dynamic, to try and protect my younger sister Molly from everything that was going on. I'd often go and find James when he ran away from home, or I'd sit with him for hours in A&E, just trying to calm him down, so that when we did eventually get home, we'd have a little bit of peace and quiet before all going to school the next day. Around that time as well, when I was 12, 13 years old, I was also sexually abused for around 8, 9 months. And throughout that whole period of time, I didn't talk to anybody about what had happened. The thing that often happens when you go through abuse is that you're left with these feelings that there is something categorically wrong with who you are. But you don't have to go through abuse to feel like that. You might have students that you're thinking of at the moment, or maybe even you yourself, who have that narrative in their head or in your head. That narrative that tells you that there is something categorically wrong with who you are. Maybe you were bullied growing up. Maybe you didn't get that job promotion. Maybe you've got students who don't see themselves represented in their communities, or they've got things going on at home. You've got to think about that pressurized school environment. Again, what pressure are we putting on kids? What are the expectations we're putting them on? Do they live up to those expectations, or are they struggling to feel like they're good enough? For me, it was a combination of all of these factors at play, as well as having a huge amount of heightened emotion. And I had to find this kind of way out. The thing is, in society tells us that when you feel wrong in yourself, what do? You change your external appearance. You change these things about you. And that's exactly what I started to do. I started to restrict what I was eating and started to increase how much exercise I was doing. And what I gradually began to realize was the more exercise I did and the less food I ate, the better I was beginning to feel about all of these things going on around me. And I think that's one of the really scary things with eating disorders and with other addictions as well, is that they promise you so much. You get this kind of instant relief in that moment. You kind of restrict a little bit, or you do that behavior and you feel this kind of amazingness inside. It numbs that emotion. It takes you out of the reality of growing up. But then it's never quite good enough. So you get to that weight it tells you to. You do those behaviors it tells you to do. But then over time, it's not quite good enough. So you're not even good enough for the eating disorder. So you keep pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself. And one thing we do see a lot with eating disorders is so many people who have eating disorders have that perfectionist trait as well. That kind of drive to be the best of the best. That competitive element. And for so many of us, it's that drive that keeps us so focused and fixated on doing these behaviors in the hope that at some point things will just work itself out. The thing with eating disorders as well is they are extremely secretive illnesses. We pretty much do every single thing we can to hide our behaviors, to hide what's going on. And for me, I became so good at it. I kind of slipped under the radar at home. I think being in a big family probably massively helped that. I made sure that I was out and about all the time. And I also rebelled a huge amount during my teens, just as a way to just not be at home. I threw myself into my sport and kept telling my teachers I was having to do a certain amount because the coach had told me to do it, using again all of these kind of justifications, making up all of these excuses. So the eating disorder just was something that was there, but no one had any idea what was happening. I managed to hide it for 4 years from every single person around me. Yes, there were points during that 4 years where maybe people made comments about it, maybe people kind of questioned it. There were points during that 4 years when I felt like maybe there was something the matter with me. Why couldn't I just eat and be involved when all my friends were doing stuff? Why was I the one sitting there with this huge amount of guilt around a mealtime? Why was that completely on me to kind of be processing it when all my friends could just eat their meals and be really happy? But as soon as I had those kind of doubting moments, those moments of guilt, I would just tell myself, it's okay, just do one more day of this and I'm sure it'll be fine. One more day and it will all work itself out. Eventually, my school did get in touch with my mum. I went to my doctor. then I was finally referred to the Children's Adolescent Mental Health Services, so CAMS. I am sure that through your school, you've had a number of students who've kind of been through that process, a number of students who've maybe been referred or are currently on referrals. But actually being a young person and going to that environment can feel absolutely terrifying. Yes, more and more people are talking about mental health issues nowadays. Yes, it's great. Your school are doing so much in this space. But there is still this judgment, this stigma attached. And particularly with eating disorders, we still see a huge amount of that stigma there. That whole kind of idea that, oh, it's just someone who wants to lose a little bit of weight. Or you get those people that get told they're not sick enough for services. They don't look like they have an eating disorder. They're not quite thin enough yet. And all of this plays on that person's conscience, again, making them feel even more guilty for the fact they even considered reaching out for support. So for me, when I arrived in that hospital for my first assessment at the outpatient team at CAMS, I was absolutely terrified of being there. I didn't fully understand why I was there, and I was in this kind of constant state of denial. I sat in the waiting room and I remember looking around at all of these kind of leaflets on the wall and just thinking like, God, I don't relate to any of these. None of these things are the matter with me. I then went into this appointment and my mum sat there next to me going on and on about all the things she thought were going on at home. She talked about the bickering, the family arguments, the stuff that kind of annoyed her in our family situation. And I was just sitting there thinking, no one really gets it. No one's really taken the time to actually properly understand what I'm going through or what I'm feeling. And to be honest, in that moment, I didn't really care. At the end of the appointment, I had to fill in all of these questionnaires, questions about my body image, my relationship with food, questions where I had to judge my mood on a scale of 1 to 10. And I remember looking down at all of these questions, trying to work this entire thing out. Do I tell people that every single day I get into bed and I cry about any amount of food that I've had? Or that I'm sitting there in my lessons and I'm ruminating over and over and over about calories and exercise? Or that every time I look in the mirror, I hate what I see? Or that I set my alarm for the middle of the night so I can get up and go and exercise without anyone realizing? But there's always this problem and this kind of fear that if you start telling people these things, that people are going to think you're unusual. But beyond that, are people going to gossip? Are they going to take away this one thing in your life that you think makes things feel better, more manageable? And the thing with anorexia particularly is when you have to go through this whole weight restoration period, despite the fact that eating disorders aren't about body image, it's terrifying having to put on that weight. It's terrifying to having to kind of reform your own identity away from this. It's terrifying having to kind of trust that on the other side of that weight restoration, everything's going to be okay. It's going to be okay feeling all of these emotions again that you've not felt for ages and ages. It's all going to work itself out. But you're so afraid in that moment, that fear completely grips you and you're kind of stuck in that situation. And so for me, the way to deal with all of that fear was to spend the next 6 months lying every single week for my appointments. Every single week tricking the system so that my weight would stay the same or it would go up. Every single week just pretending like I was fine, life's fine, everything's just fine. But actually the reality was I was really, really struggling. I was finding life increasingly difficult. On the outside, I was still this really kind of happy, bubbly kid, someone who was a bit naughty at school, or extremely naughty at school, my teachers would probably say. Someone who was out a lot, someone who was in my sports, doing all of this stuff. Someone who was working hard. But inside, I was finding things really, really difficult. Every single evening, I'd get home from school and I'd be emotionally and physically completely exhausted. I'd be trying to make myself go and exercise and my whole body would just be aching. Every single night, I'd get into bed and I'd be just praying and wishing that something would just change, that something would just click in my head and that everything would be fine. But the next morning, I'd always get up. I'd look in the mirror, I'd weigh myself, pull on my tracksuit bottoms, go downstairs to the kitchen, open the fridge door, and my brain just would not let me start to eat. And eventually, after 6 months as an outpatient, I ended up being admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where I then spent the next year of my life in recovery. So learning a lot about food, learning a lot about exercise. But the biggest thing for me in that moment was actually learning to talk about what was going on. it was a combination of kind of refeeding my brain so that it was able to rewire its stuff, but having those psychological interventions along the way. So quite often when I'm working with teachers in schools, they often ask, like, what can teachers do in that moment? What could have been said to kind of stop it escalating to that point? And I think the first thing is I had some really, really great teachers at school. I had one teacher in particular who was just so honest and open about her own experience of living with mental health issues. I had a teacher who would come and visit me actually when I was in treatment, probably on a week-to-week basis, kind of sharing where she was at, kind of how things had been, what she'd helped her, like all of this sort of stuff. And actually having that level of honesty, I know it's not always kind of the thing that teachers do, but actually for me, it helped me to have someone that I could relate to and someone who I was like, do you know what, they actually get it. They get how difficult it is to be in this kind of messy, horrible situation. I think the other thing that teachers teachers could have done or be more aware of in that time was, I think, is looking for those kind of subtle bits at the start to kind of look out for. When I was at school, there was like this whole, and it probably is a very common thing that happens in school, but I went to an all-girls school and there was a period of time where everyone started to not go to lunch. Everyone would be kind of talking about how they'd missed lunch today and, oh, yay, go us kind of thing. And the teachers didn't really seem that bothered about it. It was just like, this is a phase, this will pass. But actually, for some of us, it wasn't just a phase. For some people, it turned into a full-blown eating disorder. So again, having that kind of point of intervention at that point, I think would have been really, really key. And the other thing that comes up an awful lot, actually, when I'm working in schools now, and something that I think would have been really helpful for me, but others have said would also be helpful for them, is thinking about that kind of nutritional element, that kind of educational factor. Again, we live in a society, I mentioned at the start, we've normalized dysfunctional relationships with food and exercise in our bodies. We normalize people fasting and, I don't know, all these kind of ridiculous like dieting techniques that people just seem to come up with. It's ridiculous. And whenever I go into school, I feel like I hear a new diet thing. And I'm like, I've not heard that one before. And I'm like, it's literally got no science base behind it. But actually, as teachers, like educating kids on actually the dangers around that, doing it in a way where they start to kind of think and process it as well. Educating them on the fact that calories don't tell us anything about the food. They don't tell us the health of the food. There's a 20% leeway either side. If we are calorie counting, if people are calorie counting, they're not even that accurate. And also remembering that food is about so much more than emotion, about so much more than the food. It's about that emotional connection. I think at the moment there's all this fear out there about ultra-processed food. And again, we need to be mindful of actually the impact of that on young people. How are we educating them on having that variety in their diets? Again, having things in moderation, everything like that. Doing it in a way where they're not feeling terrified or scared to do something. And actually, for me, that educational factor is essential in all of this. Again, kind of empowering and equipping and upskilling people to actually understand food in a better way. So for me, like I said, I ended up being admitted to a hospital. It wasn't just people with eating disorders, it was people with all different types of mental health issues. One of the biggest things in that moment when I got admitted was I still didn't think there was anything the matter with me. I was still in that constant state of denial. I spent my first 3 days lying in bed and being encouraged to eat. And I was just so angry at every single person around me. I absolutely hated being in this hospital environment. I felt completely abandoned. I was 17 years old and I should be out and about with all my friends. And instead I was just stuck here. But on my third day, one of the nurses came in to see me. And she brought with her these massive pieces of paper. She marked on this piece of paper where my head was and where my feet were. And she asked me to draw the outline of what I thought I looked. So I kind of knelt on the floor and drew this outline of my body. Once I'd done that, she got me to lie down on that exact same piece of paper. She took a different colored pen and she then traced around me. I then had to stand up and look back down at those images. And they were so, so different. I thought at first she'd lied to me, that she'd somehow tricked me. But I had this realization then that there was something seriously wrong with the way that I viewed myself. And maybe there was actually something the matter with me. And it was in that moment where I kind of was like, do you know what? I've got something wrong with my brain. What can I do? And it was the evidence that I needed to just at least start that whole process of recovery. But it wasn't easy after that. Again, I think so much of the time when people talk about eating disorders, we don't talk about that messy emotional stuff that comes alongside it. The fact that everybody on the outside thinks that if you're physically looking okay, if you're physically eating, everything's totally fine. But mentally, there's so much more work that needs to happen. For me, on that Friday night, I committed to starting the process, thinking, in all honesty, that I'd be out within 2-3 weeks. Little did I know that I'd spend the next year battling to get to a place where they discharged me and where I'd be well enough to kind of function outside of that hospital environment. So for me, alongside that and the therapy, was about removing the emotion from the food. So again, having the safe space to talk about what was going on. It was about refeeding my brain and kind of challenging a lot of those thought processes around food. Food was something that I was absolutely terrified. So again, getting to a space where it was neutral. And it was about thinking about all of those reasons why I wanted to get well. When you have an eating disorder, you think that you're completely invincible. You think that your life will just carry on and that everything will be okay. And I think the really scary reality is for so many of us, we function at a high level with an eating disorder. For so many people, we see celebrities, we see influencers on like Instagram, you name it, all these people that we look up to. And they're all functioning with an eating disorder, having hugely successful lives, if that's what successful means to you. But beyond that, we've got people who do just kind of get on with their day to day. And we don't realize that actually they're not really living their life to the full. For me, I was convinced before I went into treatment that life was just like this, that everything, again, like I say, was going to be totally fine. But I didn't realize that actually the things I was missing out on, I didn't really have the energy to do it. I was always thinking about food and calories. I had to take Tupperware whenever I went to my friends' houses. I had weeks of meal prep that I always felt like I had to do. And I'd lost kind of this drive and spontaneity about life, which is something that I really, really craved. When I was in treatment, I began to think of all of these things that the eating disorder had stopped me doing. Really big ones for me was I knew I wanted to do a lot of traveling when I got out of hospital. I knew that I wanted to have a family one day. I knew I wanted to go to uni. And it was all of these things in those moments when I was kind of sat at a mealtime, not really knowing how to do this, that I had to hang on to. Think, do you know what? If I just want to do that, I just want to do that. I've got to sit with the pain and find a way through it. So I spent a year in treatment, took my A-levels in hospital, and ended up being discharged 2 weeks before I went to university. I really wanted to have a completely fresh start away from where I grew up, like a fresh start with different people, and just see whether I could kind of function outside of treatment. At that point, I was extremely institutionalized, but I knew what I had to do to stay well. I knew that if I just stuck to my meal plan, then at some point things would start to click. And over that kind of 3 years at uni, things did gradually begin to get a little bit easier. I gradually began to kind of relax more around the food and trust myself. I gradually began to kind of challenge behaviors around exercise. I gradually began to kind of open up. And I gradually began to just understand my body and my brain so much more. We know statistically that only 50% of people currently make a full recovery from an eating disorder. 20% of people remain chronically unwell for the rest of their lives. And 30% of people settle in this kind of halfway house. I personally believe that every single person with an eating disorder, if they're given the right interventions, they can and do fully recover. I know heaps of people who've made that full recovery, people who've been unwell for decades. Length of illness, severity of illness does not stop an individual recovering. What stops an individual recovering is the lack of available treatment, the lack of available kind of people available to treat people, and also others not providing hope that people can fully recover, so people feel defeated and want to give up. For me, at the height of my illness, I was convinced that I'd be better off dead. All I wanted was for that suffering to completely end. And that feeling of hopelessness and that feeling of defeat was huge. And that's something that so many people face. But that's why for me, whether we're clinicians or not, one of our roles is to provide that hope that people can fully recover. And as teachers, maybe that's part of what you think about of the session today. How can you have these conversations where you're providing that hope when you've got people in your school environment who are struggling with eating disorders or exercise addictions? Beyond that, we do have to think kind of practically about our mental health and kind of how we can support that in the wider context. For me, there are a number of things that I have to do, things that I just have to be aware of. I think the first thing for me is identifying times of the year, times in life, where I'm potentially going to be triggered by something. During my first pregnancy, I was so aware of the statistics that 75% of people who go through a pregnancy who have an eating disorder or who've had an eating disorder will relapse in the aftermath of the pregnancy, like the bit when the baby's here. And for me, I was so aware of that statistic that I had to look and think about actually what can I set up during my pregnancy to manage that time afterwards. It's about identifying times of the year. I know stereotypically people with eating disorders find Christmas unbelievably difficult. There's this intense focus on food. It's a massive family thing, like just event after event after event. If we're aware that's going to be a triggering season, what can we do to manage it? Can we plan better? Can we find people that we can talk to? Can we have boundaries in place? Can we make sure we're not talking about dieting? Again, kind of creating that environment where things work, but also being aware that actually these triggering situations can have a huge impact on how we're feeling in our bodies. Our body image is a presentation of our feelings. It's the way we project our feelings onto ourselves. When you've got kids that look in the mirror, or maybe even you yourself, and you look in the mirror and say, do you know what, I feel really fat today, I feel really heavy. Firstly, fat and heavy are just describing words. They're not bad words. But what is actually going on in that moment? Fat is not a feeling. So what is that feeling that you're feeling? Is it the anxiety? Is it the stress? Is it the guilt? When you start to speak to kids about what's actually going on, they can start to predict that actually my body image is going to be bad because I've got an exam that day. My body image is going to be bad because I've got X, Y, Z on. Again, when we start to empower young people to think about this in a much more broader context, it will allow them to actually make those distinctions and help them to also get to know themselves. We need to be mindful of kind of meal times. Again, are they enjoyable? Are they fun times? Dining rooms in schools can be really, really stressful for people with eating disorders. But also we know that a huge percentage of people with eating disorders also are neurodivergent as well. So again, how are we kind of linking that up? How are we creating that safe space? If you've got young people that you know are in recovery from an eating disorder, can you offer that distraction around meal times? Again, it's not strictly in your job, but actually, how can we, again, create that environment or empower their friends to offer that distraction too? I talked a little bit already about that kind of educational factor around kind of food, nutrition, things like that. But again, that kind of goes beyond that into that role of social media. We shouldn't be telling kids what they should and shouldn't be looking at online. But it's about kind of giving them the skills to make those decisions. If they're looking at content, or even if you're looking at content that makes you feel rubbish, maybe don't look at it. Again, having those open conversations with kids. And it's about checking in with them, again, making sure they've got space to talk, making sure that they've got space to feel like they're being heard, giving them the skills to communicate what is actually going on. Again, so many people with eating disorders really struggle with that communication aspect. I think for so many of us, we numbed emotion for so long. And if some of us, we feel like we're wrong in ourselves, we then kind of get so worked up and worried and we're feeling a certain thing. So we kind of shut it off or don't want to deal with it. But actually having that space to talk and communicate is really, really key. So what I'm going to do now, just kind of quickly, is kind of get you to think a little bit more about kind of spotting the signs, eating disorders more broadly, and then we'll end with, like I said, those kind of practical things as well. So on the screen in front of you, you'll be able to see an eating disorder continuum. At one end, you have people who have this total body acceptance, people with healthy normal eating habits, people who are at healthy weight for age, height, and their body type. At the other end, you'll have someone with an eating disorder. So that could be your people with anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, ARFID, people with orthorexia, you name it, kind of any eating disorder that there is. In this middle bit, you have any sort of disordered eating. People who restrict, people who compulsively overeat, and people who fast or use laxatives. It could be anything. I want you to take a moment to think about where you might position yourself on that continuum. I would probably say that most people probably sit in that middle ground. I think I probably spent most of my life sitting in that middle ground. And then I started my recovery. And I'm not able to entertain any of these behaviors. Because if I do, it might be that contributing factor that causes my brain to go back into that energy deficit, which will then cause the eating disorder. The problem is, though, is a lot of us have normalized a lot of those behaviors, haven't we? We've normalized a lot of disordered eating and we just take it as normal. We normalize the fasting, the dieting, the excessive exercise. We praise the excessive exercise. For the sake of this, and I would say that if you've got people that you're kind of concerned about in that red flag, kind of red box, red flag area, I would always go with your gut and have that conversation. But for the sake of this, how do we know when we should be worried? And that's when there are three key factors at play. So the first one, if you've got multiple behaviors, so people who might also have the body image issues, people who have that change in mood. And remember that change in mood isn't just someone withdrawing or pulling back. Again, I think stereotypically when we think of mental health issues, we automatically think of that. But it could also be someone, and like in my situation, I started going out a lot more. I rebelled a lot more. I was not much more naughty at school, messed around a lot more as my kind of way of just pretending like things were fine. Number two is that obsession. So the thoughts that completely consume that person. People may be thinking about calories. They might also find it hard to kind of be present in a room. They might spend a lot of time kind of scrolling on their phones, looking at food, watching cookery programs, things like that. And then you might also really notice that actually if you've got lessons before or after a meal time, again, kind of that distraction in the run up to it, the distraction straight afterwards. And then the third one is that functionality aspect. So in some situations, people will stop going to school, but in other situations, you might have people who maybe stop going to lunch. You might have people who stop going to certain restaurants because they're afraid of the food that will be there. Maybe they pull back at meal times, or they have such a strict exercise pattern that actually thought of not doing that exercise causes them so much anxiety that they then don't go to the event perhaps instead. So you've got that change in mood. We kind of touched on the obsessive exercise and change in food patterns. And you've got people that you might not notice this in your school environment, but again, just to be aware of that kind of meal preparation. So people who are meal prepping, perhaps in your school environment, it might be that people have the same thing for snack, lunch, dinner every day. Again, kind of having that very regimented cycle around food. And if something slightly changes, even if it's a brand or a slightly different kind of bread or something like that, that will cause a huge amount of anxiety for that person. In some situations, you will have people who will change kind of visibly. So that might be they lose weight, they gain weight, they might change their muscular physique. But it's really important that we don't wait for those physical changes before reaching out and having that conversation. It's really important as well to remember that only 6% of people with an eating disorder will ever fall into that underweight category. So you've got this 94% cohort of people who will never fit into that stereotypical, what we think an eating disorder should look like. And again, we just need to be mindful of that when we're kind of talking about all of these things. You might have people with bulimia who go to the bathroom after meal times. They might have bloodshot eyes, sores on their hands, or slightly swollen glands as well. And again, with things like orthorexia, you might notice that kind of change in food patterns as well. People talking about their strict habits, again, where they've got them from. I'm sure you hear a handful of these conversations around the corridors at school as well. But again, just kind of being aware of them, kind of picking up on them. And I think, again, it's really important, particularly in a school environment, but to not look at these things as isolated incidences. You might have a student, as an example, who has started to look really tired recently. They might then start to skip lunch. They might then you might hear them talking about kind of strict habits, things like that. As a standalone thing, it might not feel like these things are big deals. But when you talk about them as a whole, that is when it highlights that actually something is going on for that person. So again, having these conversations with the staff members, kind of picking things up like this, will actually help to kind of create a bigger picture of what actually is going on for that person. And again, when we talked to the students, we did talk a lot about actually how it's okay to tell your teachers if you kind of notice things as well. And that doesn't make them a bad person or a bad friend or anything like that. So actually, we need to be looking at that kind of broader evidence there as well. So when you do have someone who you're worried about, who may have an eating disorder, I think the first thing is, I think it's important to think about who is the best person to approach that student. Is it a member of staff that maybe has a better rapport with that student? Is it the school nurse? Is it a school counsellor? Anyone like that? Like, who is best placed to be doing that? If you're taking the individual out of a lesson to have this conversation, you're doing it over a break time, again, prepping the kind of teacher in the lesson afterwards, if they might be a bit late. So please don't quiz them on why they're late. Again, kind of making it easier for that person to just slip back into that environment is something that came up a lot when we were developing a resource recently for schools. It's also about thinking about kind of what interventions you can offer as a school. Do you have school policies around this? Do you have a GP that you can refer them to? Do you have the family that you can kind of call and again have that conversation with? And then what's the best time to have this? Again, because it's a food related issue, I normally would suggest kind of avoiding times around lunchtime. Again, that might be quite hard for them to engage. Maybe try a break time or kind of first thing in the morning or after school as well. But just kind of, again, I think just being mindful of that for that individual. There's a couple of things that you can think about when you're having these conversations. And on the screen in front of you, you'll see a number of questions that are really good starting grounds to actually kind of start again to kind of have these conversations. These are particularly helpful if you've got a student who says they're kind of fine, they're kind of constantly pushing back, which we know a lot of people will be doing. But then in these situations, it might be that you can just print out some of these questions and kind of say, do you know what? Okay, cool. Could you just answer these questions and see what they'll say? You can then also go back to it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later as well. So creating a neutral space is really, really key. Having those direct conversations, sharing your concerns, talking about the behaviours that you've noticed or that other people have flagged. And then giving them that space to respond. Don't assume you know what's caused these behaviours. I think, again, so much of the time with something like the pandemic, we all made the assumption that the pandemic was the cause of all these people developing eating disorders during that period. But actually, it might have been something else that was going on at home or at school during that time. So again, don't make those assumptions. And then think about where they can go and get that immediate support and make that really easy for them. Have a list of helplines available they can go and look at, places they can go and read up on some more information. Again, making that really, really accessible for them. I always think that despite the fact that waiting lists are massive at the moment, we should be kind of getting people to go to their GP. And again, having that conversation, having their bloods done, like having that person that they can also kind of check in with. And again, if you've got that relationship with their parents, having that conversation with their parents or carers, where they can then kind of have that conversation with the GP as well, to kind of bring the GP up to speed. And then after the conversation, just reminding them that, you know, it's not like you're not going to be watching them for every move, like you're there when they want to talk to you, things like that. And I think, again, so much of the time with eating disorders is because it's such a secretive illness. As soon as people start to find out, that fear kind of increases. So kind of reassuring them around that is really, really key. And then if they don't open up, which will happen, it happens a lot. I work in this space and it happens all the time. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating when you can see someone struggling and they don't want to admit that something's going on. But it's about remembering that actually eating disorder is not just about the food. It's because something else has caused that and something else is going on. So how can we kind of create that space again where they can communicate and open up as well? It's about having a plan in place after that initial meeting so you can check in with them a few weeks later and see how they're doing. And if you are worried about kind of anything else, speaking to their kind of whole kind of network of support as well. Within your school, you need to remember it's about their mental state, not their weight. You need to start normalizing mental health conversations. I know you do that so much already within your school environment, but again, thinking about how you can start to normalize these things more. Is it that you send out a newsletter to carers or parents once a month or something, and you have a section on mental health or on eating disorders, again, kind of normalizing that conversation. It's about being mindful of the messaging that you're pushing as a school. I think, again, so many schools kind of have this obsession with fitness and exercise and movement. We get kids to walk a mile a day, or we race. I don't know, the other day actually I heard of a school with kids actually who were 7 and 8 years old who do the bleep test every day for a month. Things like that. I know that some schools have to weigh kids because of public health initiatives. But again, being aware that all of these initiatives can actually have catastrophic impacts on children's mental health and can be a contributing factor in an individual developing an eating disorder. How are we creating that healthy environment for kids to really strive and to understand their bodies? Have you got signs stuck up around your school telling kids to eat only XYZ food or to take the stairs so they burn a certain amount of calories? Again, being aware that actually a lot of that messaging can be really, really unhelpful. And it's about making sure there's clear signposting that's played. Again, can feel so overwhelming to kind of reach out and have that conversation with someone. That guilt that so many people feel for reaching out and kind of starting this. So again, having that signposting in place is really, really key. In your staff room, avoid diet chat. Be mindful of how you are talking about food. If you hear kids talking about food or joking around about it in the corridors, pick them up on it. Again, have that conversation. Create that school environment where people, where the school is not normalizing this eating disorder culture. And then if you've got kids that you do know struggle with eating disorders, what are we doing in that lunchtime setting to make sure that they're kind of coping with going into that environment? Are we sharing menus beforehand? Are we giving them distraction techniques? Are we, again, empowering their friends to have these conversations as well? When we're talking about eating disorders, we need to make sure that we're not talking about how to engage in eating disorder behaviors. That we're not kind of providing personal measurements, whether that's BMI, hospital admissions, kind of weight, amount of exercise, anything like that. We need to make sure that we're not stigmatizing and not glamorizing eating disorders. And we need to make sure that we motivate people to act, to actually get well, to get to a space where they feel able to see a life outside of their illness. And then looking a little bit more broadly at your school environment, like we've kind of touched on some of this already. But the first thing is, like, how are we creating an environment within our school where we're open to people of different body sizes? Are we calling people out when they're teasing people on what their body looks like, whether it's done in a jokey way or whether they're kind of actually bullying someone? What are we doing to stop weighing children within schools? Again, in your sports environment, how are we creating that safe space for kids to really, really thrive? And how are we offering kind of that balanced food, that kind of nutritional element too? Again, in a way that's not scaring or fear-mongering kids, but actually teaching them on, like, actually how to do things, how to eat, how to have that healthy relationship with food and with exercise and with their bodies as well. Are we educating parents? Are we educating the kind of our staff teams? Are we educating students on all of this as well? I think, again, so much of the time, people shy away from talking about eating disorders because we are afraid of getting it wrong. But we need to create an environment where we normalize these conversations, because that's the only way that people are going to start to recover. We need to make sure that we're listening to people, we're not judging them, that we're creating, like I said, that environment where it's just acceptable to talk. And then just very quickly, just before we finished, I just wanted to highlight something that I'm currently working on at the moment. So I launched a campaign called Dump the Scales back in 2019. The reason I launched the campaign originally was because people with eating disorders find it very difficult to get support unless they fit neatly into a BMI bracket. Historically, this was very much focused on how underweight a person was. People were being told they weren't thin enough for treatment, so often being discharged or being told they couldn't access services at all. Now, we're seeing a whole kind of varied range of this, with people being told they're not thin enough for treatment. They then come back, at which point they're then told they're too sick to be treated. They're now untreatable. We've got kids 16, 17 years old who are being moved onto palliative care pathways because they're not responding to treatment for an eating disorder in the time frame that their treatment service wants them to. We've got pretty much no services apart from 2 across the entire country, people with ARFID. We've got about 2 services for people with binge eating disorder and very little evidence-based research going into any of this. Dump the Scales campaign is all around changing this. It's all around making sure there's adequate funding going into services, making sure that people are getting the right support, the right treatment, but also making sure that actually we're equipping all frontline staff to have conversations around eating disorders and thinking about what that looks like as well. It would be amazing if you could sign the petition, if you could share it. We launched the new all-party parliamentary group report back on the 22nd of January, and they're doing kind of a massive push after that again to kind of highlight the neglect within services and to try and again kind of just get it all changed. People with eating disorders shouldn't be dying. They shouldn't be condemned to a life with this illness, but yet so much of the time they are. And it's our job to actually kind of come together and try and change this. And if you are particularly interested in this element of the campaigning, or you've got students who are as well, again, please do feel free to get in touch and I can have a little bit more of a conversation with you that way. But thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting and insightful. I know there was a huge amount of content as well. So please do let me know if you've got any other questions or any thoughts or things like that. And if you want any additional resources, things that I've kind of touched on too, please do let me know as well. But a massive thank you for listening.
강의를 잘 들었습니다. 어나? 아직 호프는 들어오지 않았네요. 곧 들어올 것 같네요. 지금, 네. 그러면 호프는 한 8시쯤 들어올 것 같은데, 잠시 다른 분들, 들어오셨네요. 웰컴 인사 좀 전해주세요. 사라님.
네. Oh. Hi, Hope. Hello. Welcome. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Yep. Yep, I can hear. Can you hear
Oh, cool.
me?
I can't hear you.
Oh. 혹시 저 들리세요, 지니님?
네.
Other people in this room can hear me. So maybe this is wrong with your settings.
Can you hear me? 안 들리시나? Hi, hello.
안 들리시는 것 같은데.
어허.
Can you hear us, Hope? Can you hear us? No?
No, I
No?
can't. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Let me see.
어떻게 하는 게 좋을까?
Here, can you try again?
Can you hear me?
I can now. Yeah,
Okay.
I can.
That's good.
Okay.
Cool. I feel like you're coming out of like my speakers, and then I'm talking through my headset. But
Yeah, but you can
it's one
hear
of
me,
those
right?
things. Yeah, I can. So that's
Yeah.
all good.
Great. Thank you for joining us on Sunday morning, right? Right now.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, we really enjoyed the lecture. My name's Sarah, and I'll be helping out with the interpretation today.
Cool.
So yeah, but yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
제 화면 문제도 말씀 주시겠어요?
Yeah, Jeannie is here with us, but she can't turn the camera on because her laptop is currently broken. So just FYI.
That's right.
먼저 지금 영국도 Eating Disorders Awareness Week 시즌이고 그래서 굉장히 바쁘실 거고 그리고 거기다가 덤터 스케일 활동까지 겹쳐져서 굉장히 많은 활동을 하고 계실 거라고 알고 있는데요. 어떻게 지내시는지 궁금합니다.
Yeah, so Ginny was asking, I think it's also Eating Disorder Awareness Week in the UK, or it's coming up soon, and you're obviously very active with the dumper scales. So just wanted to know how you've been.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, good. So yeah, we've just finished Eating Disorder Awareness Week here, and they did a theme of community, which Dump the Scales feeds into really nicely because we're a group of campaigners who bring together people with lived experience. But yeah, it's been a good week. I think we've had some debates in Parliament and a couple of like other talks and things like that. But we're kind of building up to our big Dump the Scales March, which takes place in April.
Wow, very soon.
Yeah.
그 마취하는 거를 매년 하는 걸로 알고 있거든요. 그래서 지난번에
네.
하는 것도 보고 했는데 되게 인스파이어링 했고, 특히 한국과 너무 다르고, 그래서 놀라웠던 점은, 그분 뭐죠? 무슨 에인트 성함을 좀 까먹었는데, 그 당사자들만 참여하는 게 아니라, 임상가들, 정신과 의사분들, 뜻을 같이 하는 그런 분들도 다 참여를 한다는 게 굉장히 놀랍고 부러웠다고 말씀 전해주시겠어요?
네. So Jeannie was saying that she's also heard of the march that you do with Dump These Scales, and it's very impressive because unlike other forms of activism, you actually include clinicians who's involved with the ecosystem of treating eating disorders. So very interesting and very impressive, and hopefully that can take off here as well.
Yeah, it's been really it's been quite hard, if I'm honest, to get clinicians on board with it. So at first there was a lot of pushback, and then we got a group of them involved, which then helped to kind of spread the word and get more involved.
Yeah.
But in the UK, we have a real split. So we have some people who really believe that people with eating disorders can recover at any point. And then we have another group of clinicians who believe that when a person has been actively struggling with an eating disorder for 5 years, that they should at that point have that treatment withdrawn. And it's the group of clinicians who don't support what we do, who we're constantly trying to get to work alongside us. And I come at it very much as if they work with us, then it makes us look stronger. It will help with funding. It helps to completely reform services, instead of us wasting our time kind of battling with each other. But I think it's interesting. I know Jeannie mentioned where you are, that it's very different in that sense with the clinicians, isn't it?
Yeah, very much different. But why do you think they're not willing to be on board or have this reluctance of joining the march? Is it just a matter of what they believe the recovery looks like, or is there something more underneath, do you think?
I think it's partly that they believe something different, but I think the main thing is the clinicians who don't want to be involved are clinicians who have been responsible for quite a few deaths with eating disorders here. And I think they're worried that if we keep campaigning around it, then all of the bad practice will come out. And then they'll probably, they might lose their jobs, they might feel at fault.
Bad conscience.
But I think for me, it's not, I guess it's not about, we don't want to shame them and make them feel like they've done a terrible job. We want to look at where things have gone wrong and think like, actually, it's not working here. How can we change it so it does start to work in the right way? And I think that's the frustrating thing, is wanting to work alongside them and them being quite reluctant to do that. We did a piece of work recently where we did a freedom of information. So in the UK, you can write a set of questions to the NHS, and legally they have to respond. So we wrote a number of questions around discharge data, and we found out that some trusts were discharging people who were very, very unwell. And when we kind of call that out, it's those moments that the clinicians get really nervous and don't want to get involved with what we're doing because they feel like we're saying they're doing a bad job. And we're not. We're just trying to make a point that the way that the system is set up here and the treatment pathways just are not working the way they should be.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
번역을 부탁드립니다.
네, 처음부터 드릴까요?
네.
우선 I'm translating back to Korean. 우선 지금 영국에서도 이제 식이장애 주간이 이제 수요일 날 끝났다고 했고요. 그래서 올해 주제는 커뮤니티였다고 합니다. 그래서 특히나 이 덤프 더 스케일이 이제 지향하고자 하고 있는 주제와 잘 들어맞아서 굉장히 특히나 이번 20주가 좀 의미가 있었다고 말씀을 해주셨고요. 그리고 또 이 의회 내에서도 이제 관련된 이야기가 많이 오고 가서 약간 정책적인 부분에서 변화를 조금 기다리고 있는 듯한 그런 이제 말씀을 해주셨습니다. 덤프 스케일, 아까 진이 말씀 주신 것처럼 임상가들도 같이 참여하고 환자들 참여하고 하는 이제 어떻게 보면은 이제 마치인데 이 관련해서 사실 임상가들을 이제 같이 참여시키는 게 그닥 쉬운 과정은 아니었다고 했고 이제 그 이유가 임상가들 같은 경우에는 이제 두 분류로 나눴는데 이제 한 분류는 섭식장애가 절대 고쳐질 수 없다라고 이제 믿는 분류가 있는 반면에 섭식장애를 치료할 수 있다, 회복이 가능하다라고 믿는 두 그룹이 있다고 합니다. 특히나 회복할 수 없다고 생각하는 이제 분류의 이제 의료진들이 특히나 이 덤프 스케일에 조금 좀 이렇게 와 같이 일을 하지 않고 좀 이렇게 반대되는 의견들을 많이 표출한다고 해서 그 사람들과의 좀 뭔가 이 조력이 필요할 것 같지만 아직까지 이루어지고 있지 않고 약간 서로 양끝에서 서로 이렇게 대립하는 위치라고 말씀을 해 주셨습니다. 그래서 그 추가적으로 제가 이제 왜 그러면은 이러한 의사들이 덤프 스케일에 참여하는 거를 조금 꺼려 하는지, 그게 단순히 정말 섭식장애에 대한 이해 문제인 건지, 아니면 그 다른 이면의 다른 문제가 있는지 부분을 해드렸고요. 거기에 대해서 답변 주신 부분은, 아마 그거는 몇몇의 이제 의사들 중에서는 섭식장애로 이제 환자를 잃은 케이스들, 늘 있을 거라고 말씀해줬고, 이제 그 책임, 그러니까 죽음과 연관된 책임감이 있다고 말씀을 주셨어요. 그래서 어쩌면은 그 의료진들이 본인들이 잘못 치료를 해서 환자들을 이제 보낸 경우에는 이러한 활동으로 인해서 본인들의 어떤 이렇게 뭐 소위 말해 잘못이 드러날까 봐 무서워해서 약간 좀 꺼리는 것 같다고 말씀을 해주셨고요. 그런데 이제 사실 이 덤프 스케일의 목적은 그런 의사들을 끄집어내서 우리가 아직 비탄을 하려고 하는 것이 아니라 이해를 다시 하고 이제 그런 대화를 시작하는 데 조금 초점이 있는 것 같은데 그런 부분은 아직 좀 커뮤니케이션이 잘 안 되고 있는 것 같다고 말씀을 해 주셨습니다.
지금 나온 얘기 중에서 정말로 심각하고 중요한 이슈 중에 하나가 assistive
네,
dying일 거예요.
네,
그러니까 아까도 강의에서도 나온 것처럼 어느 정도 치료를 했는데 실패한다고 하면 얘는 바로 호스피스로 보내버리는 그런 것들이 있어서 그걸 뭐라고 하죠? 그 severe 그게 있는데 크로닉 아노렉시아라고 있는데 아마
네.
그거에 대해서 되게 많은 활동을 하고 계실 건데 거기에 대해서도 여쭤봤으면 좋겠습니다.
음, 네. So the next comment slash question from Jeannie was, I think you also mentioned about assisted dying. So in often cases where a patient has gone through multiple treatments, and then the physician thinks that there is no hope, then they will just send the patient to a hospice center and care, and label it under chronic anorexia. And we also know that you do a lot of activism around that. So we just wanted to know how that's going and what's your understanding of it.
Yeah, so so in the UK, so I'll do that. So firstly with the assisted dying bill, so I think it was probably about a year, was it last year? A year and a half ago, so 18 months ago probably. The Labour government came in here, and one of the first things they tried to get through in their first 100 days was the assisted dying bill. So it was led by one of the MPs here, and she really pushed it. But one of the issues that we found with it was there weren't the safeguards in place for people affected by eating disorders. They hadn't thought about it from a mental health issue. They hadn't thought about it from a nutritional perspective. So we first of all tried to lobby the MPs to try and get them to firstly get rid of the assisted dying bill until it had the right safeguards in place. Whilst we got a lot of coverage and there were lots of conversations around eating disorders in the House of Commons, the assisted dying bill still went through to the next phase, which is in the House of Lords. But at that point, we were able to actually get in there and change some of the safeguards. So we got some stuff put in to make sure that people with eating disorders, if they were malnourished, then they couldn't go down that route. So again, trying to think about it in that sense as well. But also used it as like an education piece to really get the government to understand what eating disorders are. And I think this is where it links in with people who are diagnosed with terminal anorexia or chronic anorexia. And again, I don't know whether it's the same where you are, but here we've seen more and more people with anorexia being diagnosed as terminal. And it's off the back of some work that was done in the States about 2 years ago, where an American psychiatrist started really pushing terminal anorexia as a concept. We then had a number of clinicians here, particularly in the east of England, who continued to push it even more and wrote a load of articles about it saying it should be done. And people got really fixated on the fact that people with eating disorders can't recover. And instead of looking at why they're not recovering, it just became this sweeping thing that they can't. And for me, and from looking at all the research, I firmly believe that people with eating disorders, with the right treatment and support, can recover at any point, at any stage. And regardless of how old they are, they just need to have the right treatment given to them. And so we started to basically just push back on all of those narratives and pulled together bits of kind of research, papers, anything like that to basically try and make people realize. Unfortunately, because of like systemic failures within the NHS here around eating disorders, we have still got lots of people who are currently on end of life care with an eating disorder. And a lot of them are trying to access services but can't access services. So what we do here when that happens is we try and get them to get a second opinion, so from someone outside of their trust. And that means that they can hopefully move into a different service who might have different views and thoughts on eating disorders. And we're seeing that actually that is working to some respects, but it still feels like a battle. And I think it's really sad. And I think I have very mixed feelings about Eating Disorder Awareness Week, if I'm honest, because we have this week here in England where like everyone's really positive, like we're talking a lot about community and the importance of community, but we're actually forgetting often that like everyday people are dying because they're being failed by a service and failed by a system. And I don't think that the awareness campaigns that we have currently here in England go quite far enough in actually portraying actually how shocking and how awful this is.
Just I have one question. So can you explain more about the dying bill? So what was on the bill? Was it supporting or was it kind of against? I didn't quite get that bit earlier.
Yeah, so we were originally completely against it from an eating disorder perspective. But
it was a law passed to allow assisted death. Is that correct? Assisted suicide?
Yeah, for eating disorders. So if you had an eating disorder, you could qualify for it.
Right.
And we didn't think that was right, and I still don't think that's right. I think that people. Yeah, I have very mixed feelings in my personal life about assisted dying. I think some people. I'm a Christian, so I'm not sure 100% where I sit with it. But I think from an eating disorder perspective, the safeguards weren't in place. And I think it was going to be used to get rid of a load of people to then free up space within services and to free up beds. And that's why we were pushing for there to be the right safeguards in place so that when someone presents at their GP saying they want to go down that route, they can have the assessment done properly. And then they can say, actually, no, you've got an eating disorder. You need to get the psychological treatment. You need to put on the weight and then we can make a decision.
Yeah. Alright, thanks. 네, 그래서 답변을 제가 통역해 드리겠습니다. 그래서 우선 어시스트 다행에 관련해서는 이제 작년에 영국의 노동당이 이제 집권을 한 이후에 이제 100일 내에 변화를 이제 야기하고 싶은 이제 그런 이제 법안 통과 중에 하나가 어시스트 다행이었다고 합니다. 그것은 이제 암 환자라든지 그런 다른 이제 어떤 질병의 영역에서 본인의 의지에 의해서 이제 그 뭐라고 하죠? 유도 자살이라고 하나요? 한국어로? 제가 잘 몰라서 한국어로는
바로 생각이 안 나네요.
네, 다행을 이제 하려고 했는데 사실 이제 그거는 처음에 이 호프 선생님뿐만 아니라 이쪽에서 활동하시는 분들은 굉장히 반대했다고 합니다. 왜냐면 특히나 거식증은 이제 거기에 들어가면 안 된다고 믿었기 때문에 이 노동당에서 이걸 이제 주도하시는 분들을 로비하려고도 노력을 했고 그다음에 이제 교육도 하려고 여러 가지 시도가 있었다고 합니다. 이러한 이제 거식증을 아까 이제 그 이제 크로닉 애노렉시아 지니님이 질문 주셔서 했던 거에 답변은 이제 특히 이제 미국에서 이제 어떠한 정신과 의사가 터미널 애노렉시아라는 이제 그 텀을 이제 시작을 했고 그게 또 특히나 영국에 넘어와서 동쪽 이스트 UK에서 좀 그러한 이제 의견들이 많이 나오고 있었다고 합니다. 그래서 결국에는 이 환자들은 치료하기가 굉장히 어렵고 약간 마치 암 환자들이 이제 죽음을 기다리듯 그런 식으로 프레임이 씌워져 있다. 그렇지만 이제 본인들이 하고 있는 활동은 그 어떤 나이에도 이제 제대로 된 이제 치료를 받으면 회복이 가능하다라는 거를 이제 계속 외치고 계속 그런 부분을 이제 강조하려고 한다고 하셨습니다. 근데 또 한 가지 특히 영국에서 이게 또 좀 어려운 이유가 이 NHS라고 하는 이제 국민 건강 제도가 굉장히 이제 많은 이슈와 문제들이 있다고 하셨고 제도적으로 그런 현재 제도적으로도 문제가 있고 재정적으로도 문제가 있고 그래서 환자가 제때 본인들이 필요한 이제 의료 서비스를 접근할 수 없다는 게 가장 문제라고 하였고요. 특히나 최근에 이제 지난 일주일 동안 그 영국 내에서 섭식장애 인식주간을 진행을 하시면서도 너무 마음이 아팠던 부분이 매일매일 누군가는 의료 접근성이 떨어지기 때문에 영국이란 나라에서 죽어가고 있다는 사실을 좀 받아들이기 어렵다라고 말씀을 하셨습니다. 네. 그러면 의료 접근성에 대한 문제, 그 다음에 이에 대한 문제를 말씀 주셨던 것 같아요.
그 안락사는 정말 유럽
네,
전역의
안락사.
문제인 것
네,
같아요.
네,
그래서
네.
얼마 전에 네덜란드의 에릭 반 프루트라고 어떻게 읽어야 되는지 모르겠는데 그분하고도 인터뷰를 했었는데 네덜란드는 안락사가 지금 합법이잖아요. 합법이어서 매년 특히 젊은 여성들이 멘탈 서퍼링이라는 거를 그 문제를 제기하면서 나는 안락사를 받아야 되겠다고 신청을 하라고 실제로 그렇게 죽는다는 거예요. 그래서 제가 알기로는 최근에 어떤 네덜란드 저널리스트가 책을 냈는데 딸이 거식증 환자였는데 이미 16살 때 안락사 신청을 자기가 했어요. 근데 거절당했는데 이듬해 그냥 결국 거식증으로 돌아가셨거든요. 그래서 그런 안락사 문제에 대해서 논의가 되게 많은 걸로 알고 있고 그래서 아마 영국도 그런 위기감 같은 걸 느낄 거라는 생각이 드네요.
네. 근데 이제 홉 선생님은 아까 이제 본인은 이제 기독교이기 때문에 굉장히
음.
반대한다고 말씀도 하셨습니다.
네. 근데 꽤 오래전에 영국 가디언인가 어디서 읽은 기사에 따르면 어떤 10대 소녀가 거식증으로 앓다가 자기는 안락사를 원한다고 했는데 결국 그게 재판까지 갔는데 판사가 그 아이의 일기장을 읽고 그래 너는 안락사 괜찮다고 오케이 해서 계속 걔가 결국 죽었다는 거예요. 아무튼 그런 윤리적인 문제들이 계속 제기되고 있는 걸로 알고 있다고 이 말씀 좀.
네네.
네.
Yeah, just on the points of assisted dying, I think Eugenie was giving us some examples that she read about in the Netherlands. So there was, I think in the Netherlands, currently assisted death is legalized, but in recent years, there is a surge of young women in their 20s applying for it under the terms mental suffering. So she was telling us about when she interviewed this particular journalist, her daughter had applied because she was suffering from anorexia, but she was initially denied from assisted dying, but then a year later she passed away due to anorexia. So I think that also, a very complicated space. And she also told me that in the UK, there was a case of a young girl who wanted to apply for assisted death, and then it went through the court, and in the end, the judge had read her diary and then had approved of it. So, I think it's again a very, a complicated issue of its own, and that requires a lot of discussions.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it's really hard because I know from my own experience of having an eating disorder that there were points when I was really unwell that I wanted the suffering that I was feeling to end. And so I know that had it been offered to me when I was in the height of my illness, I probably would have gone down that route. But I'm always really grateful that I had people around me and I was given treatment that helped me get to the space that I'm in now, where I no longer feel like that. And I think that's the scary thing is I think people, even with the courts, and the example you're giving, I think I know the one you're referring to. And I think it's hard because I think in a lot of people's diaries, they will have written, I just want to die. I cannot go on like this. And for me, it shows from the court like a real lack of understanding of actually what an eating disorder is. And I believe that we should be holding space for people to recover. And when they're not recovering, again, we need to look at actually what's going wrong. How are we failing them? We had a girl recently in England, and I can share it afterwards if it's helpful. But she went through the Court of Protection. The Court of Protection, she goes by the name of Patricia for legal reasons in that. and she was marked as untreatable and had her treatment completely taken away. A year later, she is still alive, and her family went back to the Court of Protection, and they had a different judge, and the judge overruled the previous decision to mark her as untreatable. And she's now in an eating disorder unit here in the UK getting treatment. And it just, I think that for me shows like the difference of understanding between even judges and within the kind of court system as well. And so it very much then depends on that. And then I think the other thing here in England is we have a real postcode lottery of support, which again, I'm sure is similar to where you are. And so you might have one patient in Norfolk, where this girl Patricia was, and then we have another patient in Oxford they've got exactly the same things going on. They've got very similar presentations with their illnesses. They were both diagnosed with autism as well. But one of them, Molly, got the treatment she needed and Patricia didn't. And although, yes, Patricia is now getting the treatment, but she's lost years and years of her life to it. Whereas Molly's now at university, like she's really living her life. And I think it's these examples that show that actually not only people can get better, but again, that difference in opinion, which then means that people have that decision taken away from them, which is one I guess it's one I don't 100% agree with in that sense. But again, it's really hard because I run one of the all-party parliamentary groups, which is a government group, which I can talk about in a bit if that's helpful. But as part of that, we produced a report in October, which was all around prevention of eating disorder deaths here. And I had a couple of people with eating disorders who got in touch with me afterwards who didn't like the report because they were on end of life care and they didn't want to go back into services because they've been completely traumatized by services. And I think that's another really sad thing in itself, is that we live in a world where people are too afraid to go into a service that should actually be saving their life, but actually it's doing the opposite to that. And apologies, I feel like I'm being very negative this morning. It's not all bad.
When you mention it's also a postcode issue, are you also implying like classism and also like access to resources perhaps as well?
Yeah, definitely, all of it. And I don't think we don't fully understand that part of it here. I think also in the UK, and again, I don't know the kind of layout and geography of where you are, but in London, I'm actually based in Bristol, but in London, Bristol and Bath, we have much better services. Whereas if you go somewhere like Cornwall, because everywhere is really spread out, the services are much worse, again, because of the lack of urbanisation that's gone on there. Very much the postcode lottery depends on everything. And I think also in those places, you just have less services available. In Wales, I think there's only 2 eating disorder services across the whole of Wales. And then again, from a inpatient bed perspective, we have an estimated 4 million people struggling with eating disorders in the UK. And yes, not all of those people will end up in hospital, but we only have 455 beds available, which means that we have such a limited amount of resource available. But one of the things that's really important for Dump the Scales is that whilst we believe that more funding needs to go into services, we also believe there needs to be a complete cultural shift within services so that the clinicians working in services believe that people can recover, but also so we get a huge range of people within services. We still very much have that stereotypical kind of treatment here where we tend to treat white, middle-class, teenage, underweight girls who present in a particular way, and not many other people can get access to treatment.
Yeah, thank you. 우선 이제 안락사 이야기를 시작을 해서 이제 덤프 스케줄까지 길게 나와봤는데요. 첫 번째, 안락사에 관련해서는 말씀하신 대로 굉장히 복잡한 문제고 우리가 쉽게 뭔가 이렇게 규정시킬 수 없는 이슈다라는 걸 좀 말씀해 주셨고, 개인 본인 경험도 이제 전 어렸을 때 섭식장애를 겪었을 때 그 고통에 대한 이제 어떤 생각을 많이 했다고 하십니다. 예를 들어서 그 일기장에 뭐 환자가 뭐 나 정말 죽고 싶다, 정말 뭐 더 이상 살아갈 희망이 없다라고 한지 그런 거를 단순히 읽고 만약에 판사가 이 사람은 안락사 가능하다고 했다면은 그거 정말 섭식장애에 대한 이해가 잘못되어 있는 거라고 말씀을
맞아요.
해주셨고
맞아요.
그리고 거식증 그 과정에서 어떠한 본인들의 고통 그리고 이제 그런 과정들을 우리는 이제 이야기를 하는 거지만 그게 절대 우리의 존재를 정의시키는 것은 아니기 때문에 그런 좀 이해가 조금 부족한 거라고 말씀을 주셨고, 또 다른 예시로는 이제 어떠한 아이가, 이제 그 법원에서 아마 이제 아동 이제 보호 법원인 것 같은데요. 거기서 어느 한 판사가, 이 섭식장애 이제 거식증의 아이는, 치료할 수 없다라고 딱 판단을 내렸다고 합니다. 그리고 한 1년 있다가 이제 같은 이제 보호 법원에서 이제 다시 재심을 받게 되었는데, 그때는 다른 판사였고, 그때 그 판사가 이전에 했던, 이제 그 판결문에 대해서 또 이제 한번 뒤집었다고 합니다. 그래서 그 환자는 그 아이는 결국에 지금 잘 치료를 이제 받고 있다는 거를 이제 말씀해 주셨고 이거를 통해서 굉장히 섭식장애에 대한 이해가 이렇게 이런 그 이제 재판을 이제 진행하는 그런 이제 법의 영역에서도 굉장히 다르다는 것도 조금 아쉬운 부분이고 그만큼 우리가 문화적으로 또 의학적으로 이해가 되게 다르다라는 걸 조금 한번 강조해 주셨고요. 그리고 또 이제 영국에서 또 다른 이제 이슈가 이제 뭐 포스트 코드 이슈에서 우리 직역을 하면은 이제 우편 번호에 따라서 환자들이 치료가 다르게 된다는 점을 말씀을 주셨는데 예를 들어서 좀 이제 부유한하고 좀 이제 그런 그 동네에서는 확실히 사람들이 그러니까 환자들이 조금 의료를 접근하는 부분이라든지 아니면은 거기에 있는 의료진들이 섭씨를 이해하는 부분들이 그렇지 않은 지역보다 조금 더 높기 때문에 그런 이슈들이 있다고 말씀을 해 주셨고요. 그리고 이제 영국 전 지역으로 보았을 때도 우선 지금 현재 한 400만 명 정도의 이제 섭식장애 환자들이 있다고 알려져 있는데 막상 이제 병동은 그거의 한 10분의 1밖에 되지 않다고 합니다. 그리고 또 특히나 런던이나 이제 브리스털, 이제 홉슨에 계신 데를 이제 벗어나면 웨일스 같은 데는 뭐 한 이제 나라로 심각하기도 하지만 결국 두 군데 섭식장애 센터밖에 없다고 말씀을 해주셔서 그런 아직 그 전역에서 이제 섭식장애 있는 환자들이 제때 치료를 받지 못하고 있는 이런 이슈들이 접근성 이슈가 조금 있다라고 예, 말씀을 해 주셨습니다. 그래서 이번에 닥터 스케일을 진행을 하시면서 이제 그동안은 계속 펀딩이 되게 얼마나 중요한지를 이제 계속 이제 이야기를 했지만 본인이 보아하니 어떤 문화적 변화도 필요할 것 같다고 말씀을 해주셨고요. 그래서 그 변화라고 하면은 결국 이런 섭식장애 가진 사람들이 회복이 가능하다. 그 회복 가능성에 대한 부분을 좀 더 앞으로 이야기를 많이 하고 싶다라고 여기까지 말씀해 주셨습니다.
한국하고 영국 의료 시스템이 완전히 극명히 차이가 나는데 영국은 정말로 공립이라고 해야 되나요? 퍼블릭이라서 NHS에 모든 게 다 소속이 되어 있잖아요. 그것 때문에 웨이트 리스트도 생기는 거고 재정적인 문제도 그것 때문에 생기는 걸로 알고 있지만 한국은 완전히 반대로 국립건강보험은 있지만 결국 병원 운영은 95%가 사립이라고 이 말씀을 주셨으면 좋겠고 또 특히 그래서 그 각 사립 병원들의 비즈니스 모델이 서스테이너블한 비즈니스 모델이 안 되면 치료할 수 있는 기회가 없어지는 것과 다름이 없는 상황이어서 우리도 역시 섭식장애 치료 기회는 뭐 훨씬 더 없다고 보시면 되고 네, 그런 문제가 많다고 말씀드리고 싶고요. 한 가지 궁금점은 호프도 그렇고 그다음에 그 굿걸스라는 책이 있는데 아마 그것도 영국의 헤들리 프리먼이 쓴 굿걸스라는 책이 우리나라에도 번역 출간이 됐는데 거기서도 헤들리 프리먼이 되게 여러 곳의 치료 시설을 전전을 하는데 되게 좋은 치료 시설도 있었고 되게 극악 안 좋은 곳도 있었거든요. 그런 게 궁금했어요. 호프가 무려 1년 동안 병원 입원 치료를 받았을 때 그때 치료 비용은 얼마나 들었는지 궁금하고 그다음에 헤들리 프리먼 책에서처럼 그 퀄리티 차이가 그렇게 극명한 여러 군데를 전전하는 경우도 가능한지 이런 게 궁금하다고도 말씀 부탁드립니다.
네.
네.
So we have another comment slash question. So as for the comments, just kind of give background of the Korean system is that, so, in the UK, you have the NHS, and because it's purely public funded and all the hospitals are of public resource. That's why you have issues with wait lists and so and so. In Korea, it's also a public system where everybody pays and contributes a portion to the National Health Service, but the hospitals, 95% of them are run private. So basically, they're private, institutions run by public fund. And because these hospitals are privately ran, if a treatment does not fit into their business model, it's hard to access treatment or create treatments. And I think we're very much aware that eating disorders are very hard to fit in their business models of being a lucrative treatment. So just wanted to kind of give you a background info on that, which might also make it even trickier for Korean patients to access healthcare because there is close to none resources.
Virtually no.
Virtually no that offer treatments because it doesn't make money. Another question that came from Ginny was, could be a little bit of a personal question, but she mentioned about the book called Good Girls. And in this book, the main protagonist goes to different types of eating disorder clinics, and it seems like the qualities are very different depending on which clinics you go in the UK. So just wanted, and we also heard that you were also at a facility for about a year, and just wanted to know what was that experience like, and was the quality different, and were you going back and forth from different treatment centers, and how much did it cost you as well?
Perfect. So I accessed treatment in 2007. 2007, yeah. So the treatment I got was not evidence-based treatment. So it was very much a refeeding center with bits of like psychological treatment alongside it, but predominantly we'll get you to a healthy weight and then we can discharge you back out into the community. And I guess at the time it worked. Like I got to a healthier weight, and I kind of coasted along. For the next couple of years before relapsing, and then trying to get treatment. Couldn't get treatment that time, and then had to make a decision a couple of years ago about whether I really wanted to get well. And I say that in a way where I know that eating disorders are not a choice. But I think for me, I'd got to this point where I'd been unwell. I'm now 35, and I'd been unwell since I was 12. And when I was in my early 30s, I just was like, I do not want to spend the rest of my life living like this. And I was really lucky because I had clinicians that I campaigned with who believed that recovery was possible. And whilst I didn't go into treatment at that point, they were kind of there alongside me, kind of helping me with food choices, getting me to think about food in a different way, looking at the nutrition behind things as well. The slight issue with my recovery at that point was I have two small children. I have a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old, and having an eating disorder when you're pregnant has its own challenges. I was very lucky that I was able to have children after what my body had been through, but I had to kind of learn to navigate that, and then also issues around depression, anxiety, things like that as well, kind of during that period. So my kind of treatment plan, I think, slightly changed at that point to focus much more on those things, and became less about kind of making sure I was having enough food, because I knew that that's something that I was able to do. I also think for me, I got to a space where I was able to sit with all of those uncomfortable, horrible feelings that you get when you eat, and just know that at some point they're going to pass and it's going to be okay. And I say that and I make it sound really easy, and it's really not. Like, as you guys will probably be able to relate to, it's really hard when you're in those moments. So in response to your kind of question, so now I spend a lot of my time going between hospitals. I work quite closely with some hospitals trying to improve the treatment that they offer people as well. And honestly, like, it's so mixed here. We're seeing a lot of private hospitals currently shutting inpatient beds for people with eating disorders. I think part of that is that the NHS pays for some beds within private hospitals, but the NHS doesn't want to do that anymore because I don't think they're seeing return for their investment, which sounds really crude, but it's just the way it is here. It's all about money, isn't it, when it comes to things like that? So a lot of the private hospitals are shutting their beds for eating disorders. And then the hospitals that we do have, they are just so mixed. Like some of them are really good. Some of them are offering really good evidence-based treatment. Some of them are looking at the whole person, making it really person-centered. But a lot of them, I'd say the majority of them, are still either just feeding a person, getting them to kind of a weight restoration point, and then discharging them. And then it's those people that will spend a lot of their lives kind of in and out of treatment, trying to get better, but not given the support they need. And I think for me, that's why there needs to be a complete shift within how we treat people, and the kind of services that we provide. And then the final part of your question, I didn't pay for my inpatient treatment. I got it on the NHS when I was 17. Since then, I have paid for the odd bits of therapy, just when I've had moments where I've kind of relapsed and not been doing so well. And then now the treatment, the kind of post-pregnancy treatment that I get help is all on the NHS as well. But a lot of people here end up paying for their own treatment, or they end up going through their insurance to access it.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was really powerful. Thank you. Very pragmatic to understand how the system works in the UK. 우선 네, 홉 선생님이 말씀을 해주셨고요. 우선 본인 같은 경우에는 2007년도에 이제 처음으로 이제 치료를 센터를 받게 되셨는데, 그 치료 센터에서는 뭔가 이렇게 에비던스 베이스이거나 이렇게 체계적인 프로그램을 갖고 있었다기보다는 이제 본인의 이제 저체중을 회복시키기 위한 이제 목적이 컸던 이제 그런 치료 방식이었다고 합니다. 나중에 말씀해 주셨지만 이제 결국 이거는 미국 영국 시스템으로 이제 커버돼서 따로 비용을 지불하진 않으셨다고 했고요. 그래서 그때 이제 이후에 이제 몇 년간 그냥 계속 이렇게 계시다가 뭐 그전 재발도 조금 여러 번 기도했었고, 특히 이제 몇 년 전에 그 재발이 조금 심했던 것 같다고 말씀하셨고, 그때 이제 본인에게 이제 던졌던 질문이 계속 내가 이렇게 살 것인가? 그렇게 계속 뭐 많은 사람들이 거식증은 이제 선택지가 아니라고 하지만 본인에게는 마치 내가 회복을 이제 선택을 해야겠다라는 생각이 들으셔서 이제 그때부터 조금 다시 잘 치료를 받고 싶다라는 생각이 들었다고 하셨고요. 또 그 배경에는 이제 같이 이 덤프 스케일을 진행을 하면서 도움을 줬던 여러 가지 임상 의료진들이 또 희망을 또 주기도 했었고, 또 그 사람들을 통해서 회복이 가능하다는 것도 조금 알게 되었다고 합니다. 그래서 그들의 좀 도움이 있었다라고 하셨고, 사실 또 이제 이러한 생각을 다시 회복을 이제 또 생각하게 된 이제 계기에는 되게 감사해도 이제 지금 현재 2명의 이제 자녀분이 이제 계시는 3개월 10개월짜리랑 그다음에 3살짜리가 이제 있어서, 사실 이제 임신한 상태로 또 섭식장애를 겪었던 몸으로서 또 다시 섭식장애를 겪는다고 굉장히 힘들었고, 또 그건 또 다른 종류의 치료였다고 생각이 들었다고 하십니다. 그래서 이제는 이제 이제 계속 치료를 이제 계속 받고 계시고, 또 이제 일도 같이 병행을 하신다고 하셨고요. 우선 영국에서 이제 지금 그 환자들이 이제 그 이용 가능한 병원들 봤을 때 사실 최근에 문을 많이 닫았다고 합니다. 특히 사립병원 같은 경우는 그 이유는 결국 이 비즈니스 모델에 이제 부합해서 돈이 되지 않았기 때문에 이제 NHS에서 문을 닫게끔 한 것들이 있었고, 그리고 이제 NHS 직접 운영하는 그런 공영 병원들은 굉장히 그 퀄리티 차이가 많이 난다고 하셨고, 이제 어떤 데들은 굉장히 좋기도 하지만 어떤 곳들은 이제 그냥 단순히 체중 회복만 하고 이제 다시 내보내는 그런 시스템들이 있어서 굉장히 많이 믹스한다고 하셨고요. 이제 마지막으로 비용 부분에서는 이제 본인이 NHS 통해서 했던 의료들은 돈을 내진 않았지만, 그 이후에 이제 뭐 개인적인 테라피나 다른 이슈들로 치료받은 거다 본인 돈을 지불하셨다. 그렇지만 또 많은 사람들이, 이제, 네. 그래서 많은 사람들이 사실 그 치료 회복뿐만 아니라 그 외적으로 쓰는 비용들이 많아서 그런 부분에서 좀 되게 설명해 주셨습니다.
덧붙여서 우리 상황을 설명드리면, 우리는 그 건강보험이 있지만 섭식장에 대해서 커버되는 거는 전혀 없고, 저는 2001년에 입원 치료를 받았는데 물론 사립이었고 입원 치료 2달 동안 400만 원이 들었고, 2001년이요. 그래서 그런 상황이기 때문에 아이들을 먹게 하기 위한 내러티브가 뭐냐면 엄마 아빠한테 돈 더 들게 할 거야? 이게 내러티브라고 말씀해 주세요. 네.
Yeah. So as a genius, also wanted to add what is it like here getting treated. So she told us her story. So she was also hospitalized at a facility in 2001, which is over 20 years ago. And at that time, she was there for 2 months, and it cost roughly £3,000 for 25 years ago, which is quite high, I'd say. And in Korea, the problem is
당시에 한 달 임금 정도가 한 달 비용이었다고.
so
네.
then that's basically the average income of monthly income that went into per month while she was there. And in Korea, even though we are covered through the national health system, there is no any reimbursement or schemes for getting treated for eating disorders, which is quite a problem. So she told us the narrative that she was fed 25 years ago when she was in the hospital was that they pressured her and telling her that if you stay here longer, your parents will basically run out of money. So you have to get better because this is an expensive treatment, which is quite harsh on top of, you know.
그래서 1년 입원하는 건 상상할 수가 없어요.
Yeah, so being there for over than a year, it seems impossible because of how much it costed the family. 또 질문 있으실까요?
맞아요. 그리고 덤터 스케일하고 APPG 활동에서 정말 놀라운 것은 일단 첫 번째로는 APPG라는 뭐라 그래야 될까요? 그룹? like-minded인 MP분들이 계시다는 게 되게 놀랍고 되게 감사한 일인 것 같고, 특히 노동당의 퀴글리라는 의원분은 아마 딸도 섭식장애 경험이 있어서 이거를 내세우면서 같이 되게 열심히 활동을 해주시는 것 같고, 며칠 전에 웨스트민스터에서 베라 웹하우스 MP분이 발언하시는 것도 봤다고 말씀 전해주시고요. 특히 아까 말씀 주신 리포트를 이렇게 발행하는 것도 되게 인상적으로 봤고, 되게 어려운 일일 텐데 이렇게 2025년에는 The Right to Health라는 리포트를 발행하셨고, 10월에는 아까 말한 것처럼 Inquiry into the Prevention of Eating Disorder Deaths라는 리포트를 발행하셨는데, 그러니까 이런 데이터들이 다 있어야 되는 거잖아요. 그래서 어떤 과정으로 이게 진행이 됐고 어떻게 가능했는지도 궁금하다고 말씀 전해주셨으면 좋겠어요.
Yep. So the work with dumper scales and APPG, especially with APPG, we think it's very impressive that there's a lot of MP members on board with it, having the public get involved. And Jeannie also mentioned that she watched an MP named Vera Wepheimer. Recently speaking at the Parliament about eating disorders, which was very impressive. With dumper scales, what really struck us was the amount of reports that you publish that you also mentioned. So I was wondering, how does that data process go, and what did you do to get those reports published?
So the reports we've done, through the APPG. So what we do is we have like a 6 months where we collect evidence. So we hold maybe 5 or 6 evidence sessions in Parliament, and we invite people with lived experience, carers, campaigners, clinicians, researchers to basically come and share what they're doing or share their experiences. And then the MPs ask them a load of questions about it, kind of in line with what we're going to do the report on. We also do a survey that goes out alongside the evidence sessions, basically just to get more stories and to try and hear from more people. And then we try and look for common themes throughout, and then we write it. Again, I make it sound so easy. And quite often it's like 4 days before the report comes out, and we're still frantically trying to make sure that everything's referenced right, everything's accurate, what we're pushing for as well. And it does sometimes, I guess it sometimes feels like, so we have to do the reports because when we write a report, do a report through the APPG, we have to get a response from the government, which is why we do them. But a lot of the responses we get from the government are very stock responses, and they don't really give us much. So it's, in that sense, it can feel quite frustrating at times, kind of doing the reports and then knowing that we're not necessarily going to get the kind of right response that we want as well. But I guess we use them to kind of help our further campaigning and to help get the issue down on paper. And then also the reports help us to get bits of media coverage as well. And without the reports, we wouldn't get the media coverage. And we need the media coverage to then put pressure on the government, and also to make society realise that actually this is an issue that's happening and something needs to be done.
Yep, thank you. 우선 그 리포트 관련해서는 이제 APPG를 통해서 이제 가능하다고 하셨고요. 그래서 한 6개월 동안 이제 증거를 이제 쌓는 작업을 하고, 그다음에 계속 MP들과 이제 여러 번 만남을 이제 통해서 뭐 서베이도 돌리고 한다고 합니다. 그래서 사실 뭐 본인 말로는 되게 쉬워 보이는 과정일 수도 있겠지만 막
어려울 것 같아요.
발간하기 4일 전까지도 계속 검토를 이제 해서 많은 이제 노력과 리소스가 들어가는 작업이라고 말씀을 해주셨고요. 그리고 제일 중요한 거는 이 리포트를 이제 발간한 후에 정부로부터 어떠한 이제 반응이나 약간 확증 같은 걸 이제 받아야 하는데, 간혹 그런 이제 반응을 이제 받지 못하거나 크게 관심을 보이지 않았을 때 조금 그럴 때 좀 힘들다고 하셨습니다. 그렇지만 이 리포트가 또 그럼에도 불구하고 계속 발간하고 중요한 이유는, 그래야 이제 미디어에서도 이런 거를 커버하기 때문에 미디어를 통해서 다시 정부를 약간 압박할 수 있는 그런 수단이 되기도 하고, 또 이제 범사회적으로 보았을 때 사람들에게 인식을 시킬 수 있는 그런 중요한 툴이라고 말씀해 주셨습니다.
한 가지 여쭤볼 게 또 있는데요. 지금 채팅에 쓰고 있는데, 영국에는 이런 제도가 있잖아요. IAPT라는 제도가 있는데, 이거는 뭐 물론 좀 더 라이트한 이딩 디서더스 말고 우울, 불안 뭐 이런 쪽들에 대한 상담을 좀 더 액세스를 쉽게 하는 정책으로 알고 있고, 우리나라에도 이게 윤석열 때 도입이 슈퍼피셜하게 됐긴 했어요. 근데 제가 알기로는 애초에는 섭식장애는 여기 포함이 안 돼 있었던 걸로 알고 있는데, 혹시 뭐 섭식장애도 이 서비스가 적용이 되는지도 궁금하고, 여기에 대한 생각도 되게 궁금합니다. 네.
So we heard about the system called this policy of IAPT, so improving access to psychological therapies. That's
이거 UK 거.
네,
UK 정책.
네.
우리나라 정책이 아니라 영국 거.
네. In the UK, we know this is in the UK, and we know that it includes for patients who want access care for depression or anxiety. And so, do you know if eating disorders are also included in the policy / the system?
So we found out last week that they've cut eating disorders from IAPT.
It doesn't include, right?
Literally they've not, I don't think they've even publicly announced it yet. But at the spring budget, which the government planned the budget for the next 6 months or so, they've taken IAPT, eating disorders out of IAPT. So we're at the moment working out what we're going to do next to kind of try and change that. So we're probably going to do an open letter and try and push back on it. But it does, it feels really messy. I'm not sure if you saw as well, we had one of the Royal Colleges of Psychiatrists is also there's going to be a £2.1 million spending cut for children's eating disorder services here in England as well. So there's been another, it's sometimes, I feel like at the moment there's lots, it feels like there's so much pushback on campaigning, and so many things that just seem to be going a bit all over the place. And I think one of the things here is that people, and I don't know what it's like where you are, but I think here it's people find it really, people with eating disorders find it difficult to campaign together. Like the charities don't campaign together. And so one of the things that Dump the Scales is trying to do is to get people to campaign together, because it means that we'll probably have a louder voice, but also we'll be much stronger together doing it. So all of the kind of cuts that we're seeing at the moment, I'm trying to put together a bit of a plan of action to help, I guess, to help reverse that. But also thinking we've got another budget in autumn, and that's where they make some really big decisions about the NHS and about where things are going next. So at that point, we'll make sure we have like a proper funding plan in place that we can present to the government and say, actually, this is what we need investment in, and this is where it should be going.
Yeah, thank you. 네, 우선 지난주에 알게 되셨다고 합니다. 이 IFT 프로그램에 이제 거시증이 이제 제외가 됐다고 하셨고요. 그래서 아직 뭐 공론화되지 않은 정보일 수도 있는데 이제 그렇게 결정이 났다고 말씀해 주셨고, 특히나 최근에 이런 섭식장애 관련 이제 펀딩이 많이 이제 커팅되고 있는 게 되게 아쉽다라고 말씀을 하셨고요. 그리고 이제 특히나 또 얼마 전에는 이제 영국 그 정부에서 아동들을 위한 섭식장애 그
맞아요.
네, 굉장히 많이 이제 줄였다는 걸 또 알게 되면서 이런 것들이 좀 많이 분노와 약간 좀 그런 약간 좀 아쉬움이 있다고 말씀을 해주셨고, 또 한 가지는 이제 본인이 점토 스케일도 하고 계시지만 이렇게 이팅 디소더를 가진 분들이 그렇게 결속을 해서 커뮤니티를 이제 생성을 해서 같이 캠페인하는 게 조금 이제 다른 분야와 조금 적은 것 같다고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 그래서 어쨌든 같이 뭉쳐서 이제 외쳐야 또 변화가 이룰 수 있기 때문에 그런 부분을 조금 더 강조해 주셨던 것 같고요. 그리고 또 이 IELTS 제도가 이렇게 바뀐 거에 대해서도 또 본인들이 이제 홉스님뿐만 아니라 그 WSK 측에서도 오픈 레터를 이제 작성을 해서 이제 어떻게 왜 이런 거에 대해서 약간 정당성 그리고 이제 그러면 안 되는지 이유를 이제 또 거버먼트에 보내줄 거라고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 그런 계획도 같이 있다고 하셨습니다.
아, 네. 그 커팅에 관한 소식이 뭐 링크드인이라는 여기 포스트가 올라오는 건 봤거든요. 근데 그건 좀 몰랐네요.
네.
이제 몇 분 안 남았는데, 네.
오늘이 섭식장의 마지막 그 강연이라서 너무 아쉽고요. 저 권잼마입니다. 저 질문해도 될까요?
네네네.
네네. 우선 제가 사정으로 중간부터 들어와서 오늘 강연자님의 전반부 내용은 잘 모르지만 그 묻고 답하는 모든 내용에 대해서 얼마나 치열하게 살아오셨는가, 그리고 지금도 얼마나 많은 그 성과를 노력하시면서 이뤄내고 있는가가 너무너무 감동적이었습니다. 그리고 너무 감사하고요. 그리고 진희 작가님한테도 진심으로 감사합니다. 이 자리를 빌어서. 그리고 저의 질문은 당사자로서 이제 몇 번의 그 재발과 함께 이렇게 지내시고 계시는데 그냥 정말 개인적인 어떤 질문입니다. 당사자로서 가장 회복에 혹은 치유적이다라고 느끼셨던 그런 방식, 그런 것들이 어떤 거가 가장 좀 도움이 되셨는지 좀 그런 게 궁금하고요. 그리고 앞으로 어떤 또 이렇게 치열하게 계속 노력하고 계시는 것이 굉장히 감동적이고 그리고 되게 중요하다고 생각을 하는데 앞으로의 비전이나 혹은 앞으로 어떤 것을 이루고 싶으신지가 좀 궁금합니다.
아, 네. 세라님, 이분은 섭식장애 치료를 오래 해오신 세라피스트라고 말씀 전해주세요.
네, 알겠습니다. 마지막 질문일까요?
네네네.
So, Hope, so this is the last question that we have from the floor. It's actually from a psychotherapist who's been treating eating disorder patients for a long period of time. She wanted to express her deep gratitude for your lecture, but also just hearing your personal stories through the FAQs really touched her and just can understand the suffering, but also the hope, everything you've gone through with your journey in the recovery. Her question was two parts, also a bit personal, so you feel free to share if you would like. First one is, as someone who has been has had eating disorders and have also had a lot of relapse, for you, what does recovery mean? And at what point did you feel like there is hope for recovery, or what recovery is? And the last part is through your activism and everything, what's your vision? Like, what are your next steps and what would you like to achieve? Although you've achieved a lot so far. So she wanted to, yeah.
Yes. So I think for me, recovery is, I think it's changed over time. I think originally it was just to kind of get by without thinking about food and exercise, and now it's to just be completely free from any of that thinking, to not be triggered by diet culture or bad body image days, and to be able to communicate actually like how I'm feeling as well, and allowing myself to feel things. Uh, I think I think for me, having two children has really shifted a lot of that. Um, like my body changed so much kind of in pregnancy, and after my second child, it's still not really. It's like it's still not gone back to what it was beforehand, and actually, it doesn't really bother me anymore. I still have days when I'm like, oh my goodness, or I have days when I'm feeling a bit low. But on those days, I don't need to do kind of any behaviors around food or exercise. I just know that it will be okay. Um, so I think that's really helped. And I think with regards to the campaigning, so and I've actually made a note to email you, Jeannie, about all of this as well, to like see whether you guys want to get involved a bit more with it. But on the 17th of April, we're launching the next phase of it here in the UK, which is going to be trying to get the government and society to really understand eating disorders properly. So we've got a video, we've got a load of campaign asks all lined up, and are working with kind of various media partners and celebrities again to try and get them to back what we're doing. And within that, we'll be really making a push for the government to develop an eating disorder strategy here in the UK. They've got them in Australia, New Zealand. We still don't have one here. And I think we need that. We need that leadership in order for stuff to really start to shift. And I think for me, I guess, it's funny. I feel like we've done so much, but I also feel like we've not got to where we want to be. And we're still getting a huge amount of pushback from the government, from some clinicians. It does at points feel like it's really toxic and really nasty out there, kind of campaigning in this space. So I think for me, if I could get the government to make a commitment to a strategy, and also the second thing I really want is I really would love the Prime Minister or the Secretary of State to sit down with people who have eating disorders and to just understand actually what it's like, to understand the mental torment that we all go through, and to just really get to the kind of nitty gritty of it. And it's interesting because in the UK, we've done that a lot with things like suicide and with other mental health issues, but we still haven't had it done with eating disorders. So I think for me, that would be just such an amazing success if that all happened as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. 네, 우선 첫 번째 회복에 대한 이제 정의와 질문에 대해서는 사실 이 회복에 대한 정의가 또 많이 그동안 바뀌셨다고 합니다. 그래서 지금은 이런 먹는 거에 대한 생각 또는 이제 운동에 대한 집착 그런 걸로부터 좀 자유로워진 상태라고 말씀을 해주셨고요. 그래서 처음에는 이제 회복이라는 거는 그냥 하루하루를 어떻게든 이제 살아나가는 거였다가 지금은 그런 사고로부터 좀 자유로워진 걸 얘기를 해주셨고 특히나 두 아이의 엄마가 되면서 또 많은 몸의 변화를 또 느끼시면서 점점 이제 그런 거로부터 자유로워지려고 노력을 한다고 하셨습니다. 그래서 특히 둘째를 낳고 아직 몸이 완전히 회복된 것 같지 않다고 말씀을 해줬고 그런 것 때문에 이제 간혹 좀 몸이 힘들거나 아니면 좀 그런 안 좋은 생각들이 들지만 더 이상 그런 것들에 이제 뭐 운동이라든지 먹는 거에 생각에 집착하지 않으려고 계신다고 하셨고요. 그다음에 이제 향후 이제 어떤 거를 이루고 싶은지 이런 비전에 대해서는 4월 17일 날 이제 어떤 새로운 무언가를 론치한다고 이제 말씀을 해 주셨고 들어보니 이제 그 다른 호주나 뉴질랜드에서 시행하고 있는 것 같은 섭식장애 그런 전략에 대한 이제 국가 전략 대해서 이제 론치를 이제 하려고 했고 여러 가지 미디어 파트너까지 이제 모집을 했다라고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 그래서 많은 것들을 이 덤프 스케일을 통해서 이룬 것 같기도 하지만 사실 아직 본인이 생각하고 있는 위치까지는 가지 않았다고 말씀을 하셨고요. 또 한 가지 본인이 이제 바라고 싶은 모습은 이제 그런 뭐 총리라든지 이런 높은 이제 뭐 장관들 이런 사람들이 이 섭식장애 당사자들과 이제 앉아서 이런 이제 담소를 나누는 모습, 그래서 그 사람들이 얼마나 이 섭식장애 환자들이 힘듦을 하루하루 겪고 있는지를 조금 하는 그런 계기가 있었으면 좋겠다고 하셨습니다. 그래서 다른 질병, 뭐 우울증이나 아니면 이제 자살 이제 층도 높은 환자군에서는 이러한 그런 이제 경험들이 있었기 때문에 언젠간 그런 높은 이제 고위 관료직에 관련 정부의 사람들이 섭식장애 환자들을 이해를 하고 같이 마주치는 모습을 조금 꿈꿔본다라고 말씀해 주셨습니다.
너무 감사합니다. 너무 감사하고 앞으로도 활동이 정말 많은 뭐라 그래야 될까? 네, 잘 되기를 바란다고 말씀 전해 주십시오. 네.
Thank you so much, Hope, again for joining us today at an early hour in the UK, and we really wish the best for Oedipus Scales and really hope the success of the launch and the future endeavors. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, I'll drop you an email with everything in it. That's interesting as well. But thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
감사합니다. 녹화를 중단하겠습니다.